Welcome in. I cannot believe it. We are here in season 3, the Cannabiz Conversations Podcast. I've been having so much fun doing this. I'm so glad we're able to bring it back for a 3rd season. It looks like enough people are interested. We're going to probably do it for a 4th. But my friends, let's not look too far ahead, okay? Because today's kickoff episode, for those of you who know me, I'm a bit of an internet creeper, stalker. I like to watch people and learn from them. And this guest today is someone I've been watching and learning from, and specifically picked to kick this whole season off. But much like last year, this year we are indebted as well to our sponsors. And this is a special one for me because Dustin and the people at Fat Nugs Magazine, they really helped me kind of, find out how to bust in here, where to go, who to talk to. So right now, if you don't know about Fat Nugs, today's episode is brought to you by them. They're a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. The magazines are super cool. The people in them are even cooler. But right now, it's even more important. Fat Nugs, Beard Brothers, Freedom Grow, Jailed for Weed. They're all in the upcoming Prisoners edition of Fat Nugs Magazine. You need to be there. They're going to be spotlighting past, present cannabis prisoner stories because absolutely no one, and I know Trent agrees with this, should be in prison for this plant. Ever. So get involved right now. I think it's like a $250 minimum, folks. I know we've got a lot of chaos going on in the world. This is something I think we can all get behind. Okay, so I did my part there because I love my sponsors and I love the fact they trust me to do it. But I love the fact that I get to talk to today's guest. Trent, how the hell are you, man?
I'm doing great. How's everything going over there?
Everything is wonderful. You know how it is. You don't now. You live in a wonderful state where you have access to legal cannabis. I still live in a prohibition state here, boxed in by really cool states here in Wisconsin, where everyone else gets it around you, but not where you live. So it's an interesting battle. It's an interesting discussion, Trent. I know you have opinions, but as part 1 goes, I'd like to hear, and I think a lot of people would like to hear, where does the origin story with Trent and cannabis begin?
Well, I'll start off that, you should be 21 or over, but I started young, I got into the industry really young. When I was in middle school, I had a friend named David Mitchell. His mom had gotten shot in the head and survived it, and she used it for neurological issues. And so she used to once in a while, she'd give us little buds, and as long as we stayed in the house or whatever, she'd be okay with us smoking weed. And she'd always say, hey, if you do anything else, it'll destroy your life, but smoking weed will never destroy your life, and I never forgot that. So like I always, when I saw my friends getting into other stuff, they would go downhill, and I always heard her voice, in the back of my head being like, this is the thing that won't hurt you, But
Trent,
a lot of people.
How old, man? Like, how old for you in that deal? And if you could give me an idea of where you grew up, I know I've kind of followed you around the Oregon to Montana, but I'm trying to get an idea of culture, because the way that you tell that story is the same way here in the Midwest that our parents treated alcohol.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm guessing it was west to southwest for you, but I'd like
Oregon.
To know.
Yeah, it's Portland, Oregon. So I was in middle school.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. No, I went to middle school in Portland, Oregon. They were from Oakland.
Okay.
So basically, when you look at the cannabis community, it's basically from the Bay Area all the way up to BC in that Pacific Northwest area, and so they came from Oakland, but she was a big cannabis connoisseur, and at the same time we lived in a more poor community. They call it Felony Flats. It's from Southeast Portland. They call it Felony Flats, but that's where I got into cannabis, and I just fell in love with the plant when I was young, and I realized it was helping me. I never took medications, but I think I might have been a little bit ADHD. I was never diagnosed or whatever, but I feel like cannabis, helped mellow me out, get me where I can think clear, and just loved it, and always stayed in the industry ever since. I started selling at 14 in 1995. But this was 12 years old at the time I'm telling you about, my friend that his mom would give us buds, I was talking to my other half, and I was like, I don't know how to explain that because it sounds terrible, but yet she was a huge positive influence on my life,
Yeah, dude, to me, there's no way that because I know the culture or whatever, you don't. Fact of the matter is, if we just remove the plant part of it, right? And you just said, a medication or a holistic approach to something, and you remove that, and people could hear the story of children being told about it. I mean, Trent, right now, look, I don't have kids, so I don't comment on parent type things. I try to avoid that minefield best I can. But I know the debate right now is heavy, right? About when should parents talk? When should they do this? When should they do that? And I just think that it's meaningful to me to hear that. Because, dude, you and I are the same age, okay? So when that happens, when we're 14, you're in Portland, Oregon, that happened to me when my parents found my weed. They broke my weed. They burned my weed. I mean, this was, you know what I mean? This was Midwest fear-mongering at its best. And it didn't stop me. I didn't, like, whatever, right? Like, I joked the other day to my wife, like, at the end of the day, that story, they found my little bowl and they found my smallest bag. Like, good thing they didn't find the ounce in the bong, that was hidden in the other half of the room. So, like, it's a win to be out, but that sort of level, your acceptance was already there, 12, 13 years old, Trent. That's pretty incredible to hear, man, especially, again, like you say, the ADHD. I tell people all the time, Trent, if you knew the amount of downers I take to get here, right? If people are like, oh, you got to lay off the coke. I'm like, bro, please. Gave it a whirl and realized that I don't use caffeine. I wake up this fucking way, dude. So if I didn't smoke a joint, my wife and pretty much anyone I engage with would be like, okay, good. Like, volume down, turn them off. So yeah, man, it's really cool. So Trent, you said you started, I like to call us legacy distributors. Okay. So you're a 14 legacy distributor. What leads you when do you start realizing, and I guess you realize medical value from the get, but in your own life, did it start to really blossom that thought, or was it because it was a core thought from the beginning? You never associated cannabis with anything else.
I knew it helped me focus, and I worked out all the time when I was a teenager while I was using cannabis and alcohol. How people acted at parties, drinking, it just wasn't my thing. Like, I'd be the one smoking a blunt in the corner while everybody's drinking and acting up, and I would sit there and I'd sell weed to the people that wanted weed, and, so when I was 14, my mom actually got me into the industry. She would be what I'd call like a Pacific Northwest hippie. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I do. I'm a Grateful Dead fan, right? Try to make it obvious. I get how the culture runs. I love it.
Yeah, and so she gave me the money for my first ounce, and when I was 14, to break down into dimes and 20s and all that fun stuff, and I'd give her some free weed and trade, and that's how I got into the industry. And I've met some amazing people that helped me along my way through those time periods, just people that I guess you could say they were the world's outcast, like a lot of the people that taught me how to grow, their parents fled the Berkeley area in the 60s, and they came up there when they were dodging the draft or whatever, and then their kids went on to be the first indoor growers, so they were outdoor growers up in the hills, and then their kids were the first indoor growers, and that's who taught me how to grow, and but
so
they always
when you started, man, when you started learning how to grow, how old are you?
I started growing at 17. I started selling at 14. And so I was selling for a group out of Eugene, even though I was from Portland. And they had the most incredible product where it was just like, I can't even explain it. I mean, still better than anything that I was seeing today. It's just the flavors were amazing. It was beautiful, frosty trichomes. I mean, in the 90s in Portland, we were spoiled. Anybody that moved there or was there at the time, they're like, this is crazy how good this bud is. It was a different time period.
And Trent, to bring that full circle in my life, so late 90s for me is when I really step up my legacy, distribution game. And being outside of the Chicago suburbs at the point, it was still kind of weird and no one was really into it. So you kind of cornered the market there a little bit at that age and was kind of ahead of everybody. And one of the guys we dealt with, he would come from the Pac North. That's where he would get some of his product, dude. And again, people, this is when we're talking like 140 an eighth. I know it sounds crazy to people, but I know no one wants to hear that today or whatever. But those are bootlegging prices. That's how this shit works. But Trent, it was even then you could easily explain and showcase why it was better than whatever it is you had on the right side of the table versus the left side of the table.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had Beaster buds, BC bud. It smelled kind of like hay. Didn't really have trichomes, but it didn't have seeds. and then you had like your outdoor from Northern Cal, which is like your mid tier. And then you had our Oregon indoor, and that was going for, $70 an eighth. And if you look at that, the 90s, $70 for an eighth in the 90s, that's adjusted for inflation. That's like paying like 150 now, but that's really where I started realizing, I wanted to be a grower, because these guys were like my heroes in Eugene. I mean, I was selling all their bud, but they were selling us quarter pounds for like $1,200. I mean, that's like 300 and 0 back then. That's phenomenal.
That's a margin one can live on, Trent. One can expand on as well.
Yeah. And I call them advanced hippies, man, because they were way ahead of their time. They were talking about not using pesticides and the importance of clean cannabis, and they had warned me about pesticides in our food and all these things. And back then I used to be like, yeah, they're kind of a little bit crazy on this stuff, but I love their weed. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But I look back at it.
Yeah, you're like, holy shit, they were onto something. I liked their weed because it was clean weed, and that's kind of the thing that we learned. We got into the caregiver game in Colorado. It was the first time I'd ever grown anything on my own. I learned from a couple of really great growers in Colorado, buddies of mine. And so we started to try and be caregivers to help people. I knew a lot of people that couldn't afford it. And I've been in the automotive industry my whole life. And so I've been fortunate to kind of create some decent wealth for myself. And so when it came to that, we were like, look, if we have the space and we can grow, people can't afford it, we'll just donate it. Like, who gives a shit? Like, if they're going to give us their permits, let's grow it for them. Let's give it to them. If they want a brownie, we'll try it. This is before you could test shit or whatever, right? But we were taught how to grow without any of that stuff. And so you knew the difference, you saw the difference. And I joked the other day about it, and a friend of mine, when the medical scene happened in Colorado, man, it was so fun, Trent, because it was like a mix of what we were doing legacy wise, but it had this like cool, doctoral legitimacy, if you will, where these dispensaries existed. You walk in, crack the cone, everyone takes a sniff, we agree on a price, it was super fun. And now it's just tagged to sale, as you know, and I get it, but at some level, I'm sure now, Trent, when you grow now, how much different is it for you to have to deal with that part of the scene versus when you were younger growing?
Well, I watched it all play out because I've been a grower since '98. So I got into it right when medical was getting started on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And, we had a 3-patient rule where you can a caregiver could only have 3 card holders. And you couldn't sell to them. So it was designed for like you to take care of your sick aunt or something, like the whole way the law was structured was basically, if you can't grow for yourself because you're not healthy, someone else can grow for you. And so Montana in 2004 passed the first initiative that allowed, it was just like our medical laws on the West Coast, but they made it so you could have unlimited cards and you could sell to them. So if you had 1,000 cards, you could have 6 plants for each one of them. You could have 6,000 plants as one caregiver and legally sell to them. So a lot of people don't realize Montana was actually the very first place that had real businesses. And
I had no idea.
Yeah,
I had no idea. I mean, I moved to Colorado in 03. And right away, when someone said to me, "Do you have your medical card?" I'm like, "What'd you say?" And then all of a sudden, dispensaries started popping up, right, in like 04, 05, and then it just sort of took off, and that's when we first got involved. But holy shit, man, I did not realize that. Thank you for dropping that fact. And I'll be honest with you, it's a bit surprising. Just from the outside looking in, Montana as a state never really kind of struck me as that. I know that's me sort of stereotyping states by politics, but it's pretty amazing. How did you learn of it, again, because you were just immersed in the game that early, before that?
Well, yeah, I'll rewind it back a little bit. Okay, so my mom was from Portland. My dad was from Bozeman. He was a firefighter in Bozeman, Montana. And one time me and my friends were in Portland, and I was talking about how there's no speed limit on the freeway at this time period. How you can just get on the freeway and haul ass. And I grew up, I was born in Bozeman, but I grew up in Portland. And so I tell my friends these stories about Bozeman. And one day we all just got a wild hair and we're like, let's just go to Bozeman and, haul ass down the freeway. Cause you don't get to go 100 miles an hour down the freeway in Portland without getting a serious ticket, And yeah, so we hit the open freeway. We went there. I ran into some old friends I knew as a kid, and they were like, this purple, because I had purple kush, and they were like, I've never seen any weed like this. This is crazy, and so I started realizing, like, if I just sold the small amounts to my friends, that we could have fun while we're in Bozeman and stuff, and just go vacation there, drop a little bit of weed. This is 2004, and then I ended up getting popped for 2 ounces of weed and got a felony for it. And so I got stuck there in Montana because I was on felony probation, and ended up going to college at Montana State, because they said you need to go to college or you need to just, work or go to college or whatever. And I was like, well, shit, I'll go to college while I'm on probation here. And then basically continue doing what I was doing and making money on campus, you know what I mean? Like, and this is 2004. And so that same year that I got that felony was the same year that the law passed. And so all these medical caregivers that were starting up their companies in Montana, they knew that I was from the Northwest, that I had really dank weed. And so all of them were like, well, how do you grow? And so I was one of the only growers in Montana at the time that really had experience. So I started consulting all these grows in Montana and it was
ain't nothing better than the corporate billing, Trent. That's just how life works. You know what I'm saying? So
and it was wild because I could legally work for them, but I couldn't be a caregiver, right? Because if you're a felon, you can't be a caregiver. And so I was able to go around and set up each grow and see different problems in each grow and adjust my systems that I was building to adapt to fix their problems. And so, in a way, it was kind of a blessing because I was able to develop a grow style that prevented using pesticides. Long story short, there was a lot of people that were spraying all the way to cut down that I was consulting. So I'd go into these warehouses and they'd have bugs and mold everywhere, spraying Avid all the way to cut down. It was disgusting. And then I'd go in and rebuild their grow, and all their people that worked for them had their card. So they would tell me how they were getting sore throats and headaches and nausea. And then you'd rebuild their grow and get it right, and it would all go away for literally all of them. And so that's when I started writing articles about the need for testing in cannabis, because at the time there was no testing yet. And I was warning medical card holders in a health magazine here in Montana that there was no testing in medical cannabis, and how to identify sprays, headaches, nausea, whatnot. But that's how I got into the whole testing argument, basically right when testing was getting started.
The testing argument, Trent, I wouldn't call it an argument per se. I would call it a spirited debate. I think that you keep yourself in those. Look, I know you from social media, right? This is the first time you and I have ever spoken. So I know what I see, and I see it as someone who has opinions, but they're rooted in what they've seen and how the facts break out for them. And so as I tell people all the time, our perspective is our reality. What we have to figure out is how to share with people in a way where we can be fair and saying, look, I don't think there is any room for debate here. I don't think you can do this any other way. And this is why, where people say, look, this is, you have to have pesticides, you have to do whatever it is. You identifying it at this level to be able to talk to people who were smoking it, see it. You're talking about something, if I have the math right, this is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You were making these concessions and considerations, right?
Yeah, our first article in a magazine was 2014, as far as identifying what the sprays were doing, and the headaches, the nausea, and all that. And when I went back to Oregon, because we sold our Montana medical company, my other half, Shani, she started a company out there because I was consulting all these companies. Long story short, I got tired of dealing with how they weren't managing their grows right. They're dirty, drinking in the grow. It was just they weren't taking it serious. And she decided she wanted to start her own company. And so then I started developing technology for grows in her grow. And still to this day, she's got her own company here in Montana. And so she's my boss basically. But yeah, long story short, the issues that we're seeing in California is just the tip of the iceberg, because almost every grow I was going in at that time was spraying. And then when we went back to Oregon to start our Oregon company in 2016, I was really excited about testing. And it turned out that the way that it was set up, they basically, people figure out what they're testing for and just switch sprays. So it's like, oh, they're testing for that, so we're going to spray this. And it's just basically all a bunch of bullshit. So yeah, that's when I started getting into the testing fraud argument, because originally I was writing about the need for testing, and then it switched to, wait, there's testing fraud that's dominating the market, and they're controlling it through test scores and through dodging the compliance test by switching sprays, which in my opinion is extremely dangerous for the consumer. And knowing that, and knowing how prevalent spraying is, if I didn't speak up, I would have felt like a piece of shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean, man, because honestly, again, having learned from people who didn't talk about sprays or didn't do anything like that, you know what I mean? Like one time, one of my buddies was like, hey, if you get these things early on first time, you can try to bomb the room. Other than that, after this day, you should never do this shit. But if you do that, you're going to end up throwing your shit out anyways, which is exactly what happened, which is exactly how it worked out. But that was it, right? It was like we never even got into the next level because you were already someone told you it was a bad idea. And so it's not surprising, right, that people would take advantage of the opportunity to start taking tests and being fraudulent about that. It's no different than athletes who get tested for steroids and then they're like, cool, that's on your ban list. Great. Let's just go create something that has a different name that isn't on your list. And we can do it that way. And the dangers are real for people as they are for plants, as they are for the consumer of that plant. And that's what concerns me, man. I'm a consumer first. You guys all make a living in this industry. I got into it as a caregiver. I've been in it in the background for the last probably 20 years, but I don't make a living at it. That isn't my gig. So you do. And when guys like you tell me that I need to be worried, that I need to look around, it's why I go through one guy to do one thing to go, you know what I mean? Like it's just an established relationship. And I live in a black market anyways. And I wonder sometimes if it were a legal market, what would I do? Because now, Trent, how am I supposed to overcome the fear of testing that I look at being bullshit to begin with? How do I fight the pessimism of testing?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I feel like it's giantly misleading when people say, oh, it's clean because it's tested. That drives me nuts. The way that my brain works is like, it's black and white. It's like, no, this is all fraudulent. And testing what I thought was going to make quality better, it actually did the exact opposite, where whoever's got deals with labs actually has the advantage. So the more of a fraudulent lab is, and the more fraudulent the cannabis company, the more they win in the game. And the only way to really identify quality is the smoothness of the smoke, if it's harsh and things like that. And the customers aren't being taught these things, but if they were, a lot of this wouldn't be happening. Because for me, it's like, I don't care if it says 32% or 18%. I care if I put it in my bowl and take a bong hit, if it gives me like a rashy feeling in my throat, a headache, those are all signs of sprays. And, I just think that THC scores has gone way out of control, where it doesn't matter how it was grown. All they care about is this little score on the COA paper. It's crazy.
Yeah, because they made it that way for the consumer. I mean, I won't lie to you. Again, when I first got out back into the market, if you will, from the Midwest out, and we were out west, and I started seeing the percentages, I was like, yeah, give me the highest percentage. And that lasted for about 72 hours because my wife and I went on a road trip from like Southern California all the way up to Portland. And along the way, we just hit dispos and we checked it out. By the time we got to Oregon, this guy's like, oh, this is 57. And I'm like, okay, all right. So see, like we've jumped the shark here, because I started down in California where someone said 18. I was like, okay, I mean, that seems reasonable to me. And then it was 25. As you went further north, man, it just kept going and going. And you're like, all right, so I have to draw the line. So I see how consumers get sucked into it there. It's a shiny object, Trent. And it's an easy. The worst part is I'm a marketer by trade, like my brain, I'm a data analytics guy. So that's the easiest low-hanging fruit to get a consumer's attention. So that's another reason you do it, right? Because there's no other way to set yourself apart. But the smokability is what matters.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because really big farms have a lot of tests, so they're important to a lab. If you're getting 150 tests a month or something, you're a lot more important than the little farm that's getting 5 tests, 6 tests. And so what, in my opinion, happened in Oregon is the market, as it flooded, it got extremely competitive. And so say you're a dispensary that's vertically integrated with massive farms, you got 20 dispensaries and you got 20 farms. Well, you have to push that weight to the consumer. And so how are you going to compete with the little company next door that has fire weed, but, say their average test score is 22%? well, you got to get that lab to give you 30% and 33%. So they can say, yeah, I know their weed's beautiful, but look at my test score, And so they really pushed it on the consumer hard too, because they were the ones with fraudulent deals. So if you know the lab's going to give you higher scores than everybody, all you're gonna do is point at that number every time a consumer comes in. Look at this 35%. In my opinion, that's a lot of how it happened.
I like to call that data convenient truth. So it's like, look at the data that supports the story that I'm telling you, and don't look at any of the other supporting data there before or after, because it won't help you to decide that this is still going to be 37% of something when the other guy is 17. And so you said something that I think is crucial, man. And we got to figure out how to crack the nut on this thing is consumer education. Okay. We have some folks we see out there, the coalition trying to do some work. Everyone's trying to do smokability. But Trent, let me ask you, okay, back up 1 second. So you've been in your industry a long time, right? I've been in my industry a long time. So what I tell people is I can't be a car consumer. I've been in the car business for 25 years. I don't know what you deal with to buy a car because I don't and haven't for a long time. You likely aren't a cannabis consumer. You aren't going to dispos to buy weekly. This is not your life. So you can't really put yourself all the way in their shoes. But how do we educate them, Trent? Where do we find a way to get consumers to understand some of these differences for their better health?
In my opinion, once you smoke good weed, that's how it is. If you walk into a dispensary that tells you, hey, you get a sore throat, headache, it's sprayed, you hand them a bud that tastes like just smooth, is where you could smoke it all day and never feel like a rashy feeling in your throat or harshness. Like the people that taught me how to grow, they said that the smoother the smoke, the more someone smokes. They'll be already stoned, but they'll want to smoke another bowl because it tastes so good. And that's really the goal of good bud. And a lot of these people nowadays in the industry, they're like, people just want cheap. They want this stuff cheap, and they're crazy because, in my opinion, I grew up in very poor communities. I lived on the reservation for a while in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, the poorest place in the country. They have seedy, shitty weed. But anytime I had my bud, they would pay anything for that high price, way higher price to get it. Because honestly, people in poor communities are connoisseurs of weed a lot more often than in wealthier communities. And so everybody just wants to push them this crap, harshy weed, but they know what good weed is, and they're not going to pay for something that isn't enjoyable,
Dude, you're so right. And it's so, again, I guess, how do we find dispensaries? How do people call that out, Trent? I mean, I know that you work in the space. I know you're a part of the space. So how we use organic on food, right? Well, what's the labeling? How do we get to a level where consumers can walk up with confidence? Because you don't know what you smoke like till you buy it, right? So you've already bought it. Is there a way to jump that piece and know before I buy it that it didn't come with pesticides?
Okay, my personal opinion as a grower, the larger the grow, the harder it is to control bugs and mold, and the harder it is to control the environment in general. And so it just typically is, the smaller the grow, the easier it is to control. So if you run into a small brand that, say, they have a couple thousand square feet and that's it, you're going to see a lot more where the owners are hands-on, the experienced growers are handling that plant. They're not trying to treat it like it's McDonald's, where they want a bunch of $12 an hour employees that don't know anything about the industry or have a passion for it. They're just like, here, get in there and do this for me. And I want to smoke something that's got people that are touching the plant that know the plant and are passionate. A lot of it can be explained through breweries. If I was going to invest in a brewery, I would invest in someone that loves beer and have been, doing small brews, different brews their whole life. My dad was a fireman, but he would do his own craft beer, for just not to sell, but obviously just for his own little brewery at home. And him and the other firemen, they'd come over, they'd all have drinks, and they'd be like, oh, I like this one, but the last one had a bit of a better, bite on this. And he would make adjustments and do another batch. And that's really what creates a craft grower, is that constant small batch innovation and adjustments that they make. So it is true that if a small grower tries to go big, there's a big chance that it's going to get out of control and they're going to end up spraying too, because it is a lot harder to do. It's a whole nother league But as far as, in my opinion, I would smoke a home grower's bud before I'd smoke a big grow's bud.
Fair enough. That's a fair place to leave us here at the end of part one. Trent, part two is all about you and what you want to talk about. I'm hoping we didn't just steal the thunder of that with this discussion we just had. But either way, lay it on me, man. What are we talking about in the second half?
You know, I would like to talk about the future of cannabis, what it should look like in an ideal situation. You know, small business, home grows, staying away from the corporate structure as a whole.
You couldn't be talking to a guy who agrees more with you when it comes to corporate structure and going small, my friend. Well, thank you guys for joining us for part one of the show. Don't forget, part two is going to be out next week. You're going to hear all about Trent's view. We're going to call it Trent's, if Trent could run the cannabis future, what it would look like. All right, that's what we're going to do. As always, we thank you for joining us. We thank Fat Nugs Magazine. Don't forget their global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. If you haven't checked out their magazines, do so. If you're a dispensary that doesn't carry them, why not? Right now, join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Brothers Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed for the upcoming Prisoners Edition, which, again, as Trent tells you, has even more meaning to him than most people. He's been through it. They're going to be highlighting stories from past and current prisoners, because at the end of the day, no one should be in jail for a plant. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time. Don't forget, uplift the plant, remove the stigma. Thanks a lot.